Welcome back to Over Dinner. I'm Jarrod.
And I'm Dr. Nikki. We're not experts. We're two people working on ourselves, both together and apart.
Sharing real and unfiltered conversations about the human experience. So if you're new to the show or have been listening for a long time, we have a new intro.
Yeah.
The reason being is we're kind of shifting the focus and how we really want to present this podcast.
Yeah, I think it was interesting because we love doing the podcast. We enjoy it so much. We love our conversations. And we struggled a little bit last season or even this season to come up with content, let's say like that. There's so much that we could talk about, right? So like from marriage to parenting to neurodiversity, all these different things. But at the end of the day, we aren't parent coaches.
No.
We aren't marriage coaches. That's not what we do or what we're trying to become. And so we asked ourselves, what are we doing? And I really was trying to find my way with building content on Instagram, and I couldn't connect the dots. And for me specifically, if I'm not congruent to it, it becomes a big challenge. But if it's something that I'm like, I know exactly how this works and feels and is aligned to that mission, it's going to just, continually come out. So Jarrod and I did some soul searching in regards to the podcast and how we got here and why we're doing this and why we felt that sharing our conversations were so important for other people to hear, right? Because we're having these cool conversations over dinner, which then turned into recording them over the phone, which then turned into this podcast. And I also remember that last season, we recorded so many other episodes that never went live, and they were purely conversational. And they were about when I was stuck or I needed some support or just about mental health, all these different things that we never ended up airing. And we kind of went away from
that's actually probably stuff we should have been sharing.
That was the stuff we should have been sharing.
Yeah, because that was real. That was the beginning of it.
That's what was so powerful. And I cannot begin to tell you, like I was at dinner on Saturday night with girlfriends. Someone again brought up the birthday episode as being, they listened to it again on their drive to the beach, and they had someone else listen to it. And so the reason why that episode is so popular is because why?
It's real.
It's a real unfiltered conversation of breaking down where we both were coming from in a very relatable experience. And we shared that with people, and now they have tools that they can use. Or you know what? Not even tools. Relatability, connection, a feeling of not being alone, recognizing like this happens in other people's relationships too.
Yeah. And I think in that conversation, which is really what we want to move this podcast to, it was a conflict that happened in our marriage. But what really came out of it is our each individual experiences through that conflict, where a lot of times you might see in a relationship that falls on one person or the other. But in anything that happens in your marriage, there's always two people involved. And so what we realized is that our own personal journeys and us being able to navigate our own stuff, past, present, wherever we're navigating, is playing out in our marriage at all times.
Right.
But the reason we're where we are at to have these conversations and have evolved our marriage is not because we've worked on the marriage.
We've worked on the marriage.
Yes.
And
but it started with working on ourselves first alongside the marriage, right? Because and it's not about you have to do the work first. So you can't work on your marriage if you have to start with yourself and forget about the stuff happening in the marriage. That's not real. But it's if each person in the marriage is open to growth and open to self-reflection, that will lead to understanding yourself, which then will lead to understand how you're showing up for your partner in a marriage. So then when those conflicts and those things come up in your marriage, we're not just talking about the actual thing that happened, but actually talking about what was happening for you as an individual and how you're going to continue to learn and grow as an individual, which in turn will better those moments when they come up in your marriage.
Yeah. Like we talk about the dance. We brought this up in several episodes of understanding your dance in a marriage. And before we went to couples therapy, we had no idea that this was our cycle. it was always happening this way. And we may even voice that, like, it always happens like this, or you're like, you don't
This
respect,
is
blah,
how
blah,
you
blah.
show up. This is
Yeah.
how I show up.
But it was then titled, it was then brought to our attention, like, this is your dance. And then what has happened, which Jarrod brought to my attention the other night as we were breaking this whole thing down, is that we go, and he just mentioned that this piece a little bit ago, is that we go to therapy, we have this conflict, we break down the dance, but then our therapist then works alongside both of us. What was happening for you in this situation? What was happening for you? And then she takes it even deeper and helps us understand from our own perspective of why this one thing impacted us, triggered us, why we react a certain way. So that way, when we get back into the dance, it can be, instead of a tango, like it can be like a slow dance.
Yeah.
Like it can be done a little bit differently.
Well, I think in the dance, typically, or how you fight or how you have conflict with your partner, it's a lot of the other person. It's what the other person's doing. We're blaming the other person. You did this, that's why I did this. But that's not true. It's your beliefs and your past experiences coming to fruition. That partner might trigger something, but what they're triggering is something that's already inside you.
Yeah.
So it's a deeper understanding. And I think it has to start with that I forget. Oh, this is an amazing question. So there's this coach that I listen to. We'll share his name in the show notes, but I just heard him again on Tim Ferriss. His favorite question to ask any client is, how am I contributing to the negative conditions I say I don't want? How am I contributing to the negative conditions I say I don't want? And that's taking ownership.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think the thing about personal growth is taking ownership of your life versus when you're not, you're just a victim to everything that happens. You're a victim to your partner, to your marriage, to external things, to things happening this way or that way. And so I think in order to grow your marriage and continue to evolve, you have to take self-responsibility, right? And your self-responsibility doesn't mean, you're doing bad things, but it's just what is the baggage or what are the beliefs or what are the experiences you're bringing to the table that with the person you're closest with and spend all your time with are bound to show up in some place or the other. So,
and even more so, I saw this quote today by Big Little Feelings. As you become a parent, all of your childhood shit is going to come out.
yeah.
And you are reparenting yourself while you are parenting your children.
Yeah.
So not only do you have the marriage or the relationship and understanding what your part is or why you're reacting a certain way or how you show up in the partnership, but then now there's children who are triggering you in certain ways that you didn't know were even.
And you have to understand that again, like your journey doesn't stop.
No.
Right. And as they get older, they're going to do more things that trigger you because new things will come up for you. Right. So it's this continuous self-discovery and self-journey while in a partnership. So that's what we realize is that, and we say it, and we laugh sometimes in the podcast. We're like, it comes back to self-awareness. Like it kept coming back. We weren't just like hitting it on the head.
I even asked him in this last episode, I said, like, what advice would you give to couples about football season? Yeah, and all he said was communicate. And I thought about it later and I'm like, okay, well, that's easy for us to be able to talk about these things because I know how you're going to react if I bring it up. And I know that if I react in this certain way, that you won't be able to hear it. But also, we've done so many things prior to that, that me bringing something up that may be so uncomfortable for somebody else is easy. So us just saying, just communicate with your partner. Yeah. It's just, we would not most likely. And here's the other thing, knowing who I am, I was raised by two therapists as an only child. I was taught to say how I feel and what I feel and see and say, right? So I've pretty much always been comfortable with the uncomfortable and talking about the uncomfortable. So it doesn't really feel like completely out of my wheelhouse to be maybe bringing that, thing up about like the football season. At the same time, it's how it's delivered, the intention behind it, understanding why I'm upset about it so I can explain that to you. So like for, I'm not trying to go on a tangent here, ADHD, but I am trying to say like an example of that would be understanding that you watching several games over the weekend is not me being pissed at you. What it ultimately is, I don't feel cared about or loved. And that may not be, you may show it in a different way.
Yeah.
But me understanding I'm feeling that way, I can then express that to you. And I also understand why that shows up for me because I've done the personal work.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
I do have a question though, is because you did personal work like how many years before I did?
I think it was kind of, I started it right before we got married. I mean, that's when I first took my first meditation introduction course, got certified. So I think it was around 2015, 2016.
And to be, just to add, where Jarrod was before that, like I just, that's where I was.
Yeah.
Well over a year ago.
Yeah.
Which is, it's like, it is a true choice.
Yeah. I mean, so that's like, 7 years.
Yeah.
Before like you really went into the depths of your journey. And so, yeah, so I think that was a big part of where we are now today is that, as we said, why we think it's important for the personal work, because our marriage still had challenges and troubles because I had done personal work. I'm not saying I'm better, but until I started seeing you do your personal work, that's why the conversation started, is because you started going inward and self-reflect, which caused us to start having these really great conversations. And I could see you growing, right? Because I think before, it, as I said, I think a lot of time when you're not in personal work, everything, there's a lot of external things that you're contributing to a lot of the things of what's going on in your life, right? And why you're feeling a certain way. And that I was doing things that weren't that were triggering you, right? But then you started going inward and really understanding yourself. Okay, Jared's doing this thing or this moment happened, but why does that come up for me?
And to also be clear, I didn't just have poof, I figured this out.
No.
I was in therapy, individual therapy, specifically focusing on internal family systems therapy with an incredible therapist who helped me understand all of those things.
Yeah.
This was not something that I was able to come to on my own. Honestly, I feel like that was my missing piece, is the healing that I needed to do from my childhood stuff, belief systems that I had created. And so Jarrod, the way he went about this is he did not start with therapy.
Mm-hmm.
He was able to connect with it in a very different way. I don't know if he was able to fully get to the root system, but he definitely was able to rewire a lot of.
Yeah, I reprogrammed.
Yeah.
I was able to reprogram my thinking, and I was able to, we actually talked about this with our therapist the other night. I was able to take maybe habits and things that were not good for me and replace them with a lot better positive habits that changed my way of thinking, gave me more agency in the way I approach things, was learning and growing and staying curious. And that just helped me with a lot of things. And then, I kind of went the other track. I went personal development. And then I got to a point where I realized I can't go any further in just personal development because there's some deep, deep shit that personal development doesn't help me get to, that I need an expert or a third party perspective to
therapy.
I needed therapy to pull that out. Where your journey kicked off with kind of therapy that opened you the door, which healing some deep things, but then you were able to get into the personal work. So there's no right way to this journey, right?
No, there's no right way. And at the beginning of this whole thing, it is really interesting now that I think about this. In the beginning of this whole thing, I would explain this I would explain it like this to Jarrod, where I would have the good thought and then quickly bounce back to the familiar, right? And I started this in, I guess, like a year. It's like September of 2023.
It's right around PAX and stuff, yeah.
So about a year ago in like September of 2023. But it was like I found myself like flip-flopping really fast. But as I continued to do the work, I found myself like going further and then going back and then going further and going back.
And you're like dipping your toe.
Yeah.
You're like, ooh, this is actually cool here, but this is new.
Yeah,
I'm going
exactly.
back. Yeah.
Exactly.
That's how it is.
And then as I progress further and further, and I'm not done. No one's ever
No
done,
one's ever
but
done.
like I'm like shoulders deep now,
Yeah.
right? Like I'm like my whole body's in it. I'm like, okay,
You just gotta get your head under.
I know. I got that's well,
Scary.
well, I think
Because
what's
the familiar is so we had this conversation not too long ago. It's like that familiar has been there for 20 something years, right? That familiar,
yeah.
your body's used to it. You're thinking
But
it's
it's
got
just so fascinating though, because so yes, it's familiar, right? For me, what happens is ultimately I think what I'm holding on to is if, and I've said this over and over and over again, if I'm not the way that I am,
who am I?
no. If I'm not the way that I am, then I'm too laissez-faire. I'm too like not caring about things, or I'm not focused. I'm too like I'm myself. So if I'm not anal
Mask
enough,
up, Nikki.
if I'm not just like on top of all my shit, or I'm not panicking about chemical explosions and hurricanes and getting, more toilet paper, then I'm too lazy.
But it's not
But I just got this clicked in my head is that self, who was dubbed lazy or whatever the adjective was associated with being an ADHD girl in the 90s, is that I internalized that, which then turned into the part, her name is Striver, who then took over and and Scout, who took over these pieces, right? But it's interesting is like if I say Striver, you're good, and I go under the water, like that is scary because it feels like it's not about who am I, it's actually that I am living me. And do I trust me? And is my self enough? And something you bring up to me often is that I don't believe myself, or that I feel like I don't deserve things. But like that is a really interesting thing that I just heard it for the first time. Like I don't trust myself.
yeah.
I trust this other part of myself. I do not trust.
Because that well you got to be very grateful for that piece and that part because you built that part to get to where you are today.
Yeah.
And now it's like, hey, you're good. Thank you so much for getting me to this point and allowing me, like, look where I am because of you. But I'm taking over now. I got you.
I know.
This is good. And that's the hard thing to do. I had a different experience. Mine was this story I had built about my life
Mm,
was so my identity
mm,
that I had to break the identity apart and say, well, then who am I? I was this baseball player. I was this star athlete. I was I played victim to a lot of things that had happened to me in my life, and that was my story. That I could use that and lean on that when I needed to. That's why this happened or why that happened. And then I really didn't know who I was after that, and I had to break that apart and rebuild a new identity of who I wanted to be. But then I was like, oh crap, I get to I get to determine who I want to be.
mm.
This is pretty cool. And I could build those, and I'm still building the pieces and still building the pieces on. But that was my experience was just like I was so tied to this identity and who this was that it was so scary that once that was gone, like then who the hell am I anymore?
Yep.
Like what am I? Like
And as you were speaking, I was thinking about how, not ironic, but when you began to change the culture within your office and then started teaching a lot of this personal growth within the professional world, identity was a huge aspect of
that's what
that.
I taught.
That's what you taught.
Yeah.
And so coming back to what we're, really aiming to coming back to what we want to talk about tonight is that is what this podcast is becoming
Yeah.
and is talking about our own individual experiences, like me with IFS therapy, Jarrod with what did you want to say? I want to speak for you.
Just anything, meditation.
Meditation.
Yeah.
Great. So
Lots of
like,
things.
yeah, lots of things. We both have a lot of pillars of things that have been supportive to us, which then in turn has helped support our marriage.
Yep.
And so that is what we will be sharing with you because we both feel called to do so.
Yep.
So tonight we're going to share the format of how we'll be showing up for you every week and what that looks like.
Yeah. Cool. So we mentioned it to kick off season 2, obviously, and now it's more clear with what the individual episodes will be, because if we are talking about personal growth and personal development as a foundational piece of who we are and then how that shows up in our relationship, you're going to get individual Nikki, her by herself, me by myself, but then also we want to do within our individual episodes invite guests because of the journeys we want to bring on people that have expertise that we can kind of unpack and learn from because we did the work ourselves, but getting someone on who can kind of take it a little bit deeper than the way we either use it or structure it is going to be, I think, really helpful.
Yep.
So the other piece will be in our couple episodes, 2 times a month. We go to therapy once a week. And these are always great conversations because it starts with something we're coming in within a relationship or conflict or something that's going on. And then it always ends up with our individual experiences. And sometimes it's like heavily focused on Nikki because, hey, we're going to stay with Nikki. And then the other times it could be focused on me. Sometimes it's a good mix between the two. But we want to reflect on our therapy sessions. Like what came out of it? What were the conversations like? What did we learn in our dynamic? And then what did we learn about our individual of why that showed up for us as individuals? So it's a little scary because we don't know most of the time we go into these therapy sessions. Like last week, it was like, no idea it was going that way. But it did, right?
We went in talking about a football game.
We went in talking about a football game and we got off into a bunch of stuff that we don't need to talk about. Yeah. But we thought it would just be a really cool experience and real in the human experience of us unpacking our therapy sessions, and probably not to the intricacies and details of it, but what came out of it, what we talked about, what we learned, and then how that dynamic played out as a couple, and then how that experience happens for us individually.
Just hearing you talk about it now too, I think it's not just for others to learn from, it's also for us to imprint it.
Yes.
Because you go to these sessions, you're like really present. You have a facilitator. It's like sometimes I forget what happened when we were there.
And when you talk about it, because like we actually drive there separately most of the time. So, and then we get home and then it's kids, put them to bed, let's eat dinner.
We actually don't.
So we really don't sit and unpack.
So we're planning on now recording after the session, or not
day after.
But we're going to be talking about our therapy sessions. And I'm really interested to see how that continues to support our growth.
Yeah. I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah, I think it'll be a lot of fun.
And scary.
And scary.
At the same time.
Well, that's all we have for you on this episode of our first episode in our new format.
New format, new.
True.
Yeah, I think getting back to why we started this, like that, I think. And I even battled with you when we're going to go on a tangent here, but like, I love those beginning episodes because it was just, we were talking like belief systems and values and all these things. And then it was like, we kept going, but like, they don't want to hear that. They need to hear this, and that we got to give them clear takeaways. And I get that. And I understand that.
I want to just say, and you tell me all the time, like every time I do that personally, like in my own professional world, it doesn't work. But when I do the stuff that is part of my core, that is authentic to me, it always works.
Yeah.
And so to that, we loved the things that we talked about last
season. Yeah. I think
we loved that.
A lot of it was relevant to our lives, but there were moments where like, what's trending? And let's go figure out how to talk about like, that's not us. That's not authentic and that's not real. Like, that's not why we started this thing. That's not, we had such great conversations over dinner. We weren't like, hey, let's look something up online and then let's have a deep conversation about it. It was just natural. And a lot of it stemmed from either a therapy session or stem from one of us doing work. Like, oh my God, I had this realization. Yeah. Let's unpack that and talk about it. Right. So this is just who we are. And I think we needed to do that whole experience. That's how it works, right? You don't know.
Yeah. I mean, I said it to Jarrod the other night. I was like, dang, I wish we had realized this from the beginning and like the branding and all this stuff.
And every time you say that, what do I say?
Well, but also we would not have gotten here without doing that first round. Yeah, so I think it's also a really just important note to put out there. Like the iterations that you have whether it's, the equipment that you buy and upgrading that, over, time, or the clearer you get on your messaging
Yeah.
or who you want to serve, all those things, like it comes with time and doing it.
Yep.
So you can't just think of it in your head. Like you'd have to do it
Yeah.
for it to.
And you got to be open because even in my personal journey, I changed beliefs to something new because of the journey. But then even farther along that journey, I said, nope, that isn't actually true anymore for me. So it's this, but you don't know like the opposite, like you can't know one thing without the other, without experiencing the other thing, right? There's no such thing as good if you don't know what bad is, right? There's no such thing as love if you haven't experienced fear, right?
Mhm.
So you have to know there has to be the polars for the each to exist. They both have to exist. So that's just life in general,
Yep.
right? You have to experience, and that's what, I'll probably talk about a lot on my stuff, right? All these challenges or things that we think are why me, why these things happen to me, they happen to you so you know that the other side also exists, because the other side that you want to exist does not exist unless its polar opposite exists as well, right? Up, down, left, right, like that's how the world works.
Yep.
It's relativity. It's essentially the theory of relativity. They have to have both. So that's what life's about, is continuing to question, be curious, learn, challenge belief systems.
And hopefully do that alongside a partner.
Yeah, do it alongside a partner, that you're both open. That's what this whole thing's about. It's not about you both have to be great and figured out your journeys and understand who you are. It's that you both are open and curious to learning and growing
And being
yourselves.
perfect.
Yeah, and being imperfect, and that you both value trying to be the best version of yourselves. Because if you both are striving for that as individuals, the marriage and the marriage that you want will come out of that. That's just a beautiful byproduct,
Yep.
and that we've got to experience, and that's what we want to share.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's it for us tonight.
That's it.
Next week we'll be back with an episode breaking down
Our first therapy session.
So
Yeah,
stay
but
tuned.
yeah, stay tuned. But please leave us a comment. Let us know. We're really excited. I think you're going to get just some really great conversations and back to the root of what we wanted this thing starting to be. So share your thoughts and of the new format and what you're looking forward to, and maybe anything you want to hear more specifically on individual episodes from either Nikki or I. But we're really excited, and I think we have a newfound energy and excitement for what's to come.
Yeah.
So we hope you guys enjoy.
Good night.
Night, guys.